Ed, I'd like to get your perspective from your clients, but before I do, investment banking is not represented here, but they're very clear on the fact that their business has to shrink, and they are shrinking it. What is your view, and include that if you would?
I think when we look at the changes that are taking place, and what I think they're a reaction to this idea of how has the search industry evolved. I think it was, from its outset, a relatively individualistic act. It was a supply of a warm body, and I think the last decade has probably seen that evolution into this advisory type business. And so actually a firm then becomes not a collection of people who may or may not collaborate with one another, and in fact may or may not compete with one another, to perhaps more of a brains trust. And you can see in the way compensation systems are changing that there is this move towards trying to get people to work together, particularly global businesses, I think, that they grew, some by acquisition, but often in big chunks. And they were, I guess they look more like franchises in some respects. So it's that how do we work together as a firm is top of the worry list, I think, for most people who are running businesses. And that collaboration can come in all sorts of different ways. We think it comes at the outset by hiring people who want to work in a team. And it sounds binary, but it's you can see business models where you have totally diametrically opposed compensation systems, and yet one with a very individualistic, commission-driven system could in fact create a much more collaborative and team-oriented experience simply by hiring people in who want to work and play in a team. So for us, a lot of it now it really is about culture. It's about who are these people. There are not many around that are good. That advisor status, someone who can talk and sell to a CEO, they're such rare animals that you have to find a way to get the best out of them. And that's not just search businesses, that's leadership advisory firms across the suite. It's somebody who is a good enough practitioner to sell to the CEO of a major business and build that intimate relationship over years. That's what everybody is trying to find. And sometimes you can hire it in, sometimes you can grow your own, sometimes you have to acquire a business in order to bring that expertise with it. What I think is really interesting in the banking reference is looking at a couple of recent CEO appointments within the search industry. I mean, the most obvious one is Tracy Wolstenholme to Heidrick, an illustrious Goldman career, a smaller business, but nonetheless a global one, Sheffield Howarth, which is a $40 million firm, appointed a guy called Mike Hammond as CEO towards the back end of last year. Mike was similarly a very successful investment banker who's invested in and is now growing the firm. And to me, there's a really interesting thing in there about this. The old school of banker actually, I think, had a very client-centric view of the world, and it's trying to bring that now to the search firms and tweaking everything from compensation through how client teams are being managed to actually give, as James references, this much more complete approach to client service rather than the individual shots that were being fired previously.
James, you had said last year when you addressed this audience that you think a lot of these changes will not bode well for the big global firms because the volume in the business is down. Even though the revenue line has been fairly constant, it's really a question of more high-level searches, but the number of searches are down. Do you still feel that way?
I'm following the excellent research done by the AESC, which shows that there's a pattern in fewer searches being done, but they're worth more. I was reflecting that. One of the interesting things about this sector is that the data on it is incredibly opaque. And I take my hat off to the AESC for where it can, shining a light on that for everybody's benefit. I think there's going to be, if it follows the pattern of other professional services, and Ed referred to this a moment ago, a greater consolidation at the mid-tier level. I think there are real opportunities to come in close behind underneath the very largest firms, but those firms at that level have a number of challenges. And I think as we look at the number of individual practitioners to think about how they can get a reputation for particular specialism, if it again follows the other professional sectors, there is plenty of opportunity for the boutique firm. But the boutique firm has to be able to credibly say it has a specialism in one of 3 dimensions, but 2 are the most are strongest and the most client focused. One is in terms of their industry vertical. The other is in terms of their practice, in other words, their particular specialism. And the third is in terms of a particular region. But as the best payers for search and professional services firms generally are companies, and as companies are becoming more integrated, more regionally diverse, and some are becoming more international, so we as professional advisors must, absolutely must, if we want to keep up with them, flex our profession so that we're able to win more share of wallet from those culprits that are the ones that pay for the good high margin business. So those are some of the patterns, I think. Just to pick up one thing from what Ed said earlier, I think that we certainly have a view that the business model in professional firms generally is under quite a lot of strain, and one particular flavour of that is the eat what you kill business model. And I know that this may be a little bit controversial, but it's meant very constructively. I think that as the eat what you kill business model works sublimely on a rising tide. And to go back to what I said a moment ago, for 20, 30 years in professional services, it's been a most fantastic market. But what has to happen in a low growth environment is you need to encourage partners and fee earners to work more collaboratively together. And if the remuneration model is doing everything it can to prevent or discourage sharing relationships and sharing knowledge, then that can put some very profound questions at the heart of a professional firm. And we're beginning to see in law that that model, which has worked incredibly well, is creaking for 2 reasons. Low growth and the fact that the clients are saying, we actually think that on your best days, you as a firm work well with us when you're collaborating and bringing things together for us. And in an industry which has done incredibly well with a particular business model, I think that it is worth asking whether that's going to suit the business, the industry well for the next 5 to 10 years.
Richard, how is that working with PwC, that collaborative concept?
So it's interesting because that's really the genesis of how we work with our clients, right? I mean, number one, it's about relationships. If you don't have the relationships, how can you play in the game, right? And you have to collaborate. You have to share insight and bring expertise. It's got to be relevant to the industry, to the company, to the individual, right? Find out what their objectives are. How do you make someone successful, right? Everyone's measured at the end of the year, they get a bonus. How are they measured? How do they get that bonus? And if you get to that level and you can help them achieve their year-end goals, you're truly collaborating with them because they see you, eventually you want to get to a trusted advisor status, and we take our relationships very seriously. We have a whole process where we map them out to collaborate, because if we don't have the right relationship, we can't achieve what you're describing. So it's critical for our business.
Janet, hasn't the law always functioned that way?
Not in the least. The UK firms are well in advance of a lot, again, gross generalization, are ahead in terms of business strategies versus US firms. They do have a team approach. I mean, think about it. All of these kids are in law school and they're beating each other's brains out, as opposed to kids in business school where they're all working in teams. So even within law firms, there is tremendous competition and almost suspicion of the other partners. Again, generalization. They are beginning to do that, but it's not been something that has been naturally adopted by lawyers. The reason the UK firms are ahead of the US firms is that you can be a really successful US firm working in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, but in the UK it's London. So they got much better about going internationally. They then had much better business structures and functions to facilitate that. So they're far ahead in terms of client relationship programs, teaming, all of which is necessary. The other point I would like to make, which is kind of off point, lawyers are beginning to realize that legal expertise is absolutely necessary, but it is not sufficient to differentiate themselves. They realize that they've got to do other things. the good practice of law. There are thousands of really excellent lawyers out there, and law firms are beginning to realize that they need to do these other service components.
So if I could just add one thing, when you talk about collaboration, I talked how important it is for us as a firm with our clients. The irony is that within our firm we have different structures, right, different lines of service. We don't collaborate as well as we could, right? It's a cultural shift, right, because someone in tax doesn't get paid for selling advisory work, doesn't get paid for selling an audit. So, the walls are up, why should I bring them in? But they're starting to realize that there's more power in our firm if you bring all lines of service, you're cross-selling to the client, and then you're collaborating internally. And we're getting there. I mean, it's been a couple of years in the making, but it's big ship, and it's critical.
Changing world. Can I open this up for questions? Anyone have any questions for the panel about our business and how it's changing and how they see it? Well, I guess you've answered all their questions. Before I let you go, Ed, I want to come back to you on the question of size. I don't think you're supposed to say that. Sorry. As some businesses are shrinking, what's your view, if any, about our business?
I think that the search industry is probably about the size that it's going to stay in terms of the number of mandates that pass through it. I think that the opportunities for growth on a firm-by-firm basis, therefore, come from the metrics we've seen of capturing more work at a higher fee level. But it's the consolidation play that you look at the fragmentation. You can see certain firms that have grown at a fair old pace over the last 5-10 years. CT Partners, Heads in Germany, there's phenomenal compound growth rates that come from offering the best talent in the market an alternative home and story. And I think that's the challenge for the industry, be they big or small, is what's the story to the best people in the market that they want to employ, and how do they turn themselves into these sticky businesses. For years we've all observed Egon Zehnder and their unbelievable ability to hire and retain talent, and I think there's some fantastic observational lessons in there for anybody who's in the search industry.
Great. Ed, James, Richard, Janet, thank you very much for your insights and thoughts, and I'm sure there's some people that want to corner you outside to ask you privately some things. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Join me in welcoming-
Cocktail hour.